Let's talk about 3 reasons why your love language is hurting you in an unhealthy relationship. So, the first reason is that the love languages are basic forms of love. So, when we're attaching ourselves to just one of those love languages, what happens is we have been conditioned to say, okay, well, this is my love language. So, as long as I'm being shown this one thing, then I'm experiencing love from this other person. But the 5 love languages are basic forms of love. So, physical touch and gifts and words of affirmation and acts of service, like all of those can be considered loving actions. So when you tell your partner in a toxic relationship that this one thing is your love language, now they have a tool to use, basically dwindled down to one thing. When they do something wrong, they know that all they have to do is act on that one specific area and it's going to reel you back in. So, when you think about the love languages as just basic forms of human decency and love inside of a relationship, then what you're doing is asking for an abundant love. You're not asking for a love that's only specific to one area and then cuts out all the rest of the responsibilities of the other person. It doesn't mean that you can't feel more loved by some of those love languages, but what it does mean is that you're not saying, okay, well, if all of the other ones are eliminated, as long as I have this one, then we're going to consider that love. The second one is if your love language is solely focused on, then you've given them the power to manipulate you. And so if I tell someone that my love language is words of affirmation, which actually used to be my love language but is no longer, then what I'm telling them is, if you withhold this, then I'm going to try to earn it. So that's a way for you to manipulate me. And then in the other fashion, if you've done things that are abusive or hurtful or hateful, then if you just do this one thing, then I'll be manipulated by that thing and continue to come back. So, as an example, if words of affirmation are your love language, which by the way is probably the least loving of all of the love languages because all it requires is knowing how to talk really nicely to somebody. And that's pretty easy, especially for somebody who's narcissistic or toxic, because if they're charming, then we know that they're really good with their words. So, if words of affirmation are the love language that you've indicated is yours, and you have somebody in your life who is toxic and manipulative, then they might lead with, in their charming phase where they're love bombing you, they might lead with words of affirmation. So, they're going to tell you how great you are, how amazing you are, how much they love you, how much they adore you, etc. And then when they're angry with you or they're looking for emotional validation in the form of negative emotions, which we know that they do if they can't get it in the other form, then what they'll do is they'll withhold those words of affirmation so that you will work really, really hard to gain them back. So you'll notice a pattern of every day they tell you that they love you, every day they tell you how great you are, every day they tell you how amazing you are. And then something happens where they're mad at you. They've annihilated your character because they're going to use those same words to abuse you. And then you are constantly doing things, all of the loving things, all of the 5 love languages, to try to get them to just give you that small thing of words of affirmation back. And so if you've shared that with somebody in a toxic relationship, then that gives them a real indicator of what they can use to manipulate you inside of that relationship. And the last one is you've given them an out for the other relationship decency. So you've limited yourself to only needing one way of love. So if I say my love language is acts of service, then that person knows that if they do the dishes or mow the grass a couple of times, then that fills up the bucket and then they can deplete it for the rest of our relationship as long as they're doing those things. I'm going to wash the car for you, but then for the rest of the week, I'm going to treat you poorly. I'm going to do the dishes for you, but then for the rest of the week, I'm going to, say horrible things to you or hold you accountable to the standard that's, really unattainable and keep moving the mark. So, when you're thinking about sharing your love language or even figuring out what your love language is, I would encourage you to say and understand that all 5 of the love languages, and even some that may not be indicated there, are the ways that you deem someone as being loving to you. And maybe you put a percentage on them, maybe you say which ones are more important than the others, But I would not say when you're in an unhealthy relationship that it is a positive for you to share which one is your top one. Because if you think back to the toxic relationships that you've been in, I bet you that you'll notice a pattern of that being used to manipulate you and the opposite of that being used to manipulate you in another way. So they'll gain love by using it, and they'll withhold love, or they'll ask you to earn the love by withholding it. And so when you're looking at those love languages, it's really important for you to determine standards of love. Maybe not just picking one of the 5 love languages, but really assessing yourself and deciding like what things feel loving to me, what actions feel loving, what words feel loving, what type of gifts feel loving, etc. And really making that checklist list your standard of love, as opposed to just picking one of the love languages and making it easy for somebody to manipulate you through that love language. And then the other thing is really thinking about love from a place of abundance, right? So you're not holding somebody to this really crazy standard of love, but you're saying, I offer this. I'm putting this on the table. Like when I come to the table, these are the assets that I'm bringing with me. And so I'm expecting that reciprocity from someone else. Now, does it mean that they have to show love the exact same way you do? No. And someone who's healthy would want you to express how you would like to receive love, and then they would give you that love. They wouldn't use that specific thing to manipulate you. They wouldn't use that specific thing to withhold things from you. But a healthy love looks like, I want to know your love languages. I want to know what you deem as loving so that I can continue to feed that into you and constantly fill up your cup. In a toxic relationship, it looks like, oh, this is good information for me to use so I know how to give you breadcrumbs, so I know how to gaslight you, so that I know how to manipulate you. And so they'll give you that grandiose in the beginning, which, by the way, tells you that they're capable of doing it. And then when they feel some type of way toward you, or they want to manipulate you, then they're going to give you the small pieces of it or withhold that thing so that you'll continue to try to earn it back because you've received some small form of it in the beginning. When you're inside of a healthy relationship, yes, you have to communicate the way that it feels to be loved. Yes, you have to communicate what love looks like to you. Yes, the other person has to communicate it, and you have to be able to reciprocate it. All of that is true. And you won't have to beg for it. They won't use it against you, and it won't be something that you're continuously trying to earn. So when you're thinking about sharing that love language with someone, I would just encourage you to make sure that you have a checklist of what love actually looks like. Make sure you have a checklist of what it looks like for you to be loving so that you can share that with your partner. And the real most important piece of this is make sure that you're in a healthy relationship to be able to start and cultivate a healthy love. Because if you're in an unhealthy relationship, all words and preferences can be used against you as a form of communication. Thanks for tuning in, and check me out on all social media sites as Carrie Nicole, and on my podcast, the Peace Podcast, on Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify.